New Jersey may be known to some as the crossroads of the American Revolution because there were more battles and skirmishes here than in any other state. Because of this, there's an overwhelming abundance of history here. There's been so much happening here for the past couple hundred years that some things can get lost or forgotten in the hustle and bustle in everyday life. I started this channel to not only cover major historical events and figures, but to also shed some light on the lesser known people, places, and stories hidden off the beaten path. And there's nowhere that I can think of that exemplifies that description as well as what we're going to be talking about today. Today we're in Matawan, New Jersey, visiting the final resting place of at least 65 individuals, 4 of which are Civil War veterans of the USCTs. Now let's go learn something. The USCTs, or United States Colored Troops, were regiments in the United States military during the Civil War that consisted of mostly African American soldiers. 179,000 African American men, many of whom were former slaves, made up about 10% of the total number of soldiers in the U.S. military. These men enlisted to secure their freedom, while free men enlisted in droves to help the Union win the war against the Confederacy. Before the Emancipation Proclamation, slaves were guaranteed freedom from the U.S. government if they enlisted. It wasn't until after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed into law that the military started actively recruiting black soldiers. Life as a USCT was extremely difficult. Soldiers were issued inadequate equipment and were paid a fraction of what their white counterparts were. Those who surrendered in battle were rarely taken prisoner, as some were gunned down by Confederates if they tried to do so. Others who became POWs were often circulated into the slave trade, even if they were technically free men. This is to say nothing of the racism and segregation these men were constantly subjected to. USCT regiments were commanded by white officers and trained separately from their white counterparts at camps made specifically for training colored troops. The first and largest of these camps was called Camp William Penn, just outside of Philadelphia. This is where enlisted men from the surrounding areas, such as New Jersey, would be sent for training. Nearly 11,000 soldiers trained here, including all 4 of the men interred in the cemetery that we are visiting today. This is all that remains of the old St. James AME Zion Church burial grounds. Today the church stands about 100 yards down the street facing the opposite road on Atlantic Avenue, but at one time it sat on the lot opposite this cemetery. From the information that I could gather, the original church apparently burned down years ago, and with it, many of the records of the people laid to rest were lost too. Because of this, the church was moved down the street and the cemetery was left abandoned and neglected. Today you can spot the remains of a few grave markers, but thanks to the work of the Matawan Historical Society, the lot has been cleared of overgrowth and other signs of neglect. There's a historical marker with some information about the church as well as a memorial to those interred here. There is only one legible stone remaining that reads William H. Shimo. Now there's a bit of conflicting information regarding his true name. Every bit of information or record that I could find, such as census records, military pension, and enlistment paperwork, have him listed as William H. Cherno, but I'm going to go with what it says on his headstone and refer to him as Private William H. Shimo. Shimo was in Company H of the 127th Infantry Regiment USCTs. There are 3 others buried here who are also USCTs, and their names are Charles Hendrickson of the 25th Infantry Regiment, William Jameson of the 25th Infantry Regiment, and James Riley of the 8th Infantry Regiment. All 4 of these men trained at Camp William Penn. The camp was also visited regularly by some other major historical figures like Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, and probably my favorite figure in American history, Frederick Douglass. Tubman and Douglass both gave speeches at the camp, so it's quite possible that one of these men were there to witness that. Out of these 4 men, we know the most about William Shimo by far. The 127th that he belonged to fought in some of the most important battles of the war. In 1864, after completing his training, his regiment was sent down to Petersburg, Virginia, to lay siege to the city. General Ulysses S. Grant planned on attacking the Confederate capital of Richmond, but because of the heavy fortifications by Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia, Grant decided to focus his attack on a town about 20 miles south of Richmond called Petersburg. Grant knew that since Petersburg was a major railroad hub, if he could take the city and cut off Richmond's supply line, then Richmond would fall soon after. What he didn't count on was how fiercely the Confederates would defend the city. The two armies dug in for a nearly 10-month-long siege, the longest in American history, and Shima was there to experience it. Eventually, the Union Army broke through the Confederate defenses, and Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia were forced to abandon the city along with the Confederate capital of Richmond on March 25, 1865. Grant and the rest of the Army of the Potomac would catch up with Lee and surround him at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. Here, Shima would witness the single most important event of the entire Civil War, the surrender of Robert E. Lee. This was not the end of the war, but it was the end of the Confederacy's hope for victory. There would be a few small skirmishes afterwards, but this moment sealed the Confederacy's fate. Soon after, the 127th Regiment would be assigned to post-war duties in Texas until the fall, when most of the men would be mustered out. After the war, Shima returned home to Matawan and passed away on New Year's Eve 1899 from pneumonia at the age of 58. Although they all survived the war, it is likely that Shima, along with these three other men, did not receive military honors when they were laid to rest. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was uncommon for black soldiers to have such memorial services, although 15 USCTs were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for their heroics during the war. It is a shame that history is something that can never be changed, but in the present, we can try to right the wrongs of the past. If nothing else, the goal of this video was to shed light on a landmark here that doesn't really get a lot of visitors, and to tell the story of a few men who served to make a better future for America. I believe they did just that, and today we remember them and the countless others who risked their lives to preserve the Union. These men who once rested, forgotten, and neglected are now finally getting the recognition that they were denied of and so rightfully deserve. For every video going forward, I'm going to leave links in the description box to historical organizations or causes that relate to what the video is about. Please consider making a donation to the African American Civil War Museum and the Matawan Historical Society. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment. We're also on Instagram at searchingforhistory. We'll see you in the next video.